Live from Washington, D.C., this is Balance of Power with Joe Mathieu and Kailey Leinz.
President Trump says we have a deal. Welcome to the Thursday edition as the president announces a deal for Boeing to sell a couple hundred jets to China. Not as many as the markets wanted. I'm Joe Mathieu alongside Kailey Leinz in Washington. Kailey, we've also got an agreement to resume U.S. beef imports, but the real news seems to be this warning from China to the president over Taiwan.
Yeah, specifically saying that could cause clashes between the two countries if not handled properly. And so fascinating when you look at the readout on the meeting from China and then from the U.S. China's obviously focusing on Taiwan. No mention of Taiwan in the U.S. readout. The U.S. readout does mention the Strait of Hormuz. China's does not.
We're trying to get our heads around all of this now, and the president is not done. That big ceremony that took place in a roughly 2-hour-long summit this morning did bring a fair amount of news. We'll be curious to hear, Kailey, if other deals emerge, whether it's with Elon Musk or NVIDIA. And
of course, aside from geopolitics, something else we were watching today here on Bloomberg TV and radio has just happened. Cerebras.
Here we go.
Just opening trading at $350 after a $185 IPO. Remember, at $185, that IPO price already priced above the range, which had already been increased from the initial marketed range. And now we've opened, 85%, a little north of that, above the IPO price. Just an incredible debut for this company that, of course, makes AI, an AI chip maker, chips that power artificial intelligence, ultimately wants to be a competitor with other publicly traded companies in this realm, like NVIDIA, of course, the king, but quite the debut for Cerebras right now.
Yeah, so much for skepticism about the AI spend right now. We're at $385, $5.5 billion IPO. Nora Melinda is standing by live in New York right now with her eyes on this new issue. Nora?
Well, this is really major for the market, especially as we see so many people fixated on another place to essentially put their money for the artificial intelligence play. Everyone really been concentrated in NVIDIA. This is a name that people are saying could potentially be a competitor to that. So this is a massive IPO. Of course, a lot of people seeing this as the biggest IPO of the year. Still, when you look at the market cap, it isn't nearly as big. People saying about 1%. Is what I'm hearing on Wall Street when you look at the market cap in comparison to NVIDIA. But the idea here is that people are trying to find a place to put their money where they can bet on the future and not necessarily put it in some of the names that we've really been seeing driving this market like NVIDIA. So you're certainly seeing people thinking about diversification right now in this moment. So clearly a lot of people on the street really digesting this, and I'm sure we'll see some really strong numbers throughout the day.
Well, yeah, clearly this is quite a reception. The CEO of Cerebras was on Bloomberg earlier today talking about how oversubscribed this IPO was. And as I mentioned, you already saw the range increased and then a pricing above the range. Now, obviously, trading well above that IPO price. What should we make, Nora, of the money that was left on the table here?
Well, that's something to definitely dig into because, I mean, when you think about these companies and you think about IPOs, this is a major moment for a company like this. And of course, the broader sector as well. Take a look at the trade that we're seeing in the macro here in the S&P 500. Information technology, still the best performing sector in the S&P. We know that this is the case as we were kind of looking at this AI trade resuming today, but of course, still getting a push up about 1.8% when you take a look at that sector. So this is a name that a lot of people are essentially depending on, and certainly you'll see it fueling other parts of the market. That's what I'm hearing from the sources that I'm speaking with.
This is the biggest IPO of the year so far, Nora, but it won't be by the time this year is over, right?
Right.
We've got SpaceX in the pipeline, Anthropic, OpenAI. What else do you have your eyes on?
I mean, the list goes on. I think that you mentioned them. These are some names that a lot of people are really familiar with. And of course, we know with SpaceX, that's something that we've been eyeing. Of course, Ed Ludlow, B-Tech, Caroline Hyde, keeping an eye on these names. And of course, a lot of people are just looking toward the end of the year. As you mentioned, this may not be the biggest that we see this year. So we'll have to keep an eye. But of course, these are some major tech names, and we're really seeing them debuting to the market right now.
Fascinating stuff. This thing is on fire, Kailey. 89% surge.
Yeah,
Insane.
It's really, really incredible. $385 is where we're trading. Again, the IPO price was $185. Nora, what do we know just quickly about the geographic exposure that this company has relative to a company like NVIDIA, whose CEO, mind you, is in China right now, as there's an active conversation about the ability to send H200 chips to Chinese buyers. Where's Cerebras in that?
Yeah, I mean, especially as we keep an eye on the broader line of NVIDIA, China, this is something that we're also keeping an eye for this company, because if you think about some of these names, it's really important that they have strong partnerships and where they're really placing their money and where they're putting their emphasis. So that's something that investors are really digging into as well with this company, that they do have big customers that they're able to really rely on and see them really power this company forward here, Kailey.
Well, it is being powered forward at this debut of trading, Nora. That is for sure. Bloomberg's Nora Melinda, thank you so much. Again, Cerebras just having opened up on the NASDAQ after a $185 IPO that raised $5.55 billion. The shares are now up some 90%, closing in on 400. I believe 385 is where they're trading right now, as we consider the artificial intelligence story and the chips that power them. As I mentioned, of course, chips very much in focus in China today, where not just President Trump, but the CEO of NVIDIA, Jensen Huang, were on hand for this state visit and meeting, which of course focused on a number of other subjects, as well as the president was properly feted by Chinese President Xi Jinping and then went into more serious conversations. Just take a listen to the characterizations earlier today.
The relationship between China and the USA is going to be better than ever before. Tonight, it is my honor to extend an invitation to you and Madam Peng to visit us at the White House this September 24th.
China and the United States both stand to gain from cooperation and lose from confrontation. We should be partners, not rivals. We should help each other succeed and prosper together.
So let's get the latest now from Beijing as we turn to Bloomberg Washington correspondent Tyler Kendall, who is joining us from there live. So Tyler, walk through what happened today, as it is now obviously the middle of the night and you are up very late or early for us. Walk us through what happened and what fundamentally tangibles have been delivered here.
Well, Kailey, at this point, we've actually gotten some breaking news and headlines within the last hour in terms of deliverables here in Beijing, including President Trump saying in an interview that China has agreed to purchase nearly 200 Boeing jets. We didn't get any additional information beyond that, exactly which types of makes or models that these would be, but it does mark a pretty significant development considering that the Chinese market is the second largest aviation market in the world, but hasn't had a significant purchase of Boeing aircraft in nearly a decade. That was one of those big ones that we were keeping our eyes on as we await further details on whether or not we will see some tangible purchase commitments when it comes to China buying U.S. agricultural goods. I'm tracking soybeans and corn, as well as energy products, as the U.S. Treasury Secretary earlier today seemed to preview that perhaps we could see a reduction in tariffs on nearly $30 billion worth of traded goods. There was a lot of optimism, I think it's fair to say, when it came to both sides talking about more trade between them. But then we started to see some mismatch, if you will, when it came to the public readouts between the U.S. and China about what happened behind closed doors. And there were some developments when it came to Iran, including President Trump telling Fox News that China has pledged to help with Iran and will no longer or will not ever send weapons to the country amid the conflict in the Middle East. Yet we haven't gotten confirmation from the Chinese side yet. And in fact, in their public readout, they instead mentioned that there was this dialogue about the situation in the Middle East, but didn't put as firm of details on it as the U.S.'s readout did, including the U.S. saying that China did agree that the Strait of Hormuz should remain a free waterway and that Iran cannot obtain a nuclear weapon. Lastly, we're also closely tracking any developments surrounding Taiwan. As you well know, we saw earlier today Chinese President Xi Jinping say that Taiwan potentially risks derailing the relationship between the U.S. and China amid what has been a summit that has been focused on stability. At this point, the U.S. is downplaying that there were any real major concerns between the two sides. Secretary of State Marco Rubio saying that it was only briefly discussed behind closed doors, as U.S. officials have signaled in the days ahead of this summit, Joe and Kailey, that their policy regarding Taiwan is not expected to change.
Tyler Kendall with us up late in Beijing. Tyler, thank you so much for the readout. That is the very latest as Tyler's traveling with the president. And we want to introduce Senator Ted Budd, the Republican from North Carolina, joins us with his view from both the Armed Services and Intel committees. It's great to have you back, Senator. on Bloomberg TV and radio. And I guess I'll pick right up where Tyler left off with this warning now from China involving Taiwan. I'm not sure what you made of that language. It seemed pretty stark coming from overseas this morning, but there are questions about potential policy changes and whether the U.S. should continue to provide weapons to Taiwan. What is your thought?
Well, first of all, talking is a good thing, and remember that the president right now is on Xi's home turf, and that's certainly something that Xi has promised to his own people, an aggressive approach to Taiwan. Remember, I mean, you know, I would say strategic ambiguity and just keeping the pressure on without allowing it to metastasize. And as long as we can just say, look, these are people that we respect, we have trade relationships with. And, you know, I think as long as we just keep the pressure on. One of the things China has to make sure that they maintain is respect on the international stage. And if they are seen, you know, in an increasingly totalitarian fashion, and if they're aggressive towards Taiwan, they begin to lose respect in the other free parts of the world. So they have a balancing act themselves, and I think it's helpful to remind them of that. But I think, again, President Trump being there, his personal strength, the way that he's negotiating right now with Xi is a good thing for America. But I would say we're going to have relationships. So much of what we design here in the U.S. when it comes to chips, they actually get produced there. It's very important. We would not want China to have complete control of that, which is ultimately what they would seek. You know, there's a massive amount of trade that goes through that area, and a lot of it is produced that affects our economy here. When it comes to chips, you know, China doesn't just want, you know, they want Huawei to be producing chips on par with what we're seeing here with NVIDIA. So that's their ultimate aim. But again, I would just say we need to keep the pressure on and keep up our relationships as we have them right now with Taiwan.
Well, I'd also like to ask about how Iran factors in here and the Strait of Hormuz, which, of course, Senator, still remains closed as you are speaking with us. The president, in an interview with Fox News, suggested she offered help when it comes to the strait, though the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, in a separate interview suggested that Trump didn't ask for that help, that the U.S. does not need China's help. Is that really true? Senator, if we don't need anyone's help, why is the strait still closed?
What we need is non-interference. Yeah, we need non-interference right now. Look, the benefits of opening the strait is not just good for the U.S. and the American consumer. It's not just good for Europe. It's also good for Asia, particularly China. I mean, much of what their energy, it comes through there. So it would benefit them as well. You know, we have demining operations going on. Ships that are not to or from Iran are able to pass through there. But I would say we can increase the safety over the coming weeks in regards to the strait. Yeah, I was with the CENTCOM commander this morning, so I think they've had an incredible operation since February 28th. You look, this is a very significant 50-year-old problem that president after president has kicked the can down the road on, and President Trump's not willing to do that. He is solving a 50-year issue. And if it's going to take since February up until now, I know nobody wants to get this done quicker than President Trump and get this wrapped up and get prices lower for the American consumer. But you cannot have a nuclear Iran, and President Trump is fixing a 50-year problem.
You mentioned that you spoke with the CENTCOM commander, and I'm sure you can't share details of your conversation, Senator, but I'm just curious what you think about the options on the table here. If this strait remains closed, with or without assistance from China, do we need to resume strikes to force its reopening?
I'm going to leave those options up to the president, but he needs to have as many options on the table as possible. But let's not look at it as something that began end of February, beginning of March. Let's look at this as something that started in 1979. And we want to be done as quickly as possible, but you can't have a nuclear Iran. This is a country that has chanted death to America. I wouldn't say the bulk of the 93 million people have, but I would say the leadership, which is very oppressive and very disconnected from its own people, have chanted death to America for 50 years. And then they took ballistic capability, which they demonstrated in recent months, plus nuclear enrichment. They tried to marry those together. You know, this is something that we can't have on the international stage. Look, if you're paying $3 a gallon for gas or $2.75, and now you're paying, you know, $4, it doesn't matter if a nuclear weapon is headed your way. Let's fix this issue, and then that will fix the energy issue, and we'll get back to lower gas prices, but a lot more peace in the world after President Trump resolves this issue.
Well, Senator, you mentioned their ballistic missile capability. I'm sure you saw the reporting in the New York Times earlier this week that new intelligence assessments say Iran has regained operational access to 30 of its 33 missile sites and still has about 70% of its mobile launchers across the country and retained roughly 70% of its pre-war missile stockpile. I'm not sure if you're able to confirm classified information, but can you at least tell us, Senator, if you think those figures are wildly off base?
Well, I can't confirm any of that, but what I can say, if they dig something out from underneath the rubble and they stick it back out there, we certainly have access to decapitate it once again. So if they're willing to continue to allow their own weapon stockpiles that remain to be degraded, that's in our favor.
There has been some skepticism thrown on those numbers, which is why we ask, Senator, more broadly, are you being briefed from the administration? I know you mentioned, again, that you met with the CENTCOM head this morning, but is the White House briefing members of armed services and intel to your satisfaction? Because we're hearing from a number of Democrats and even some Republicans who say no.
Well, we've had the Secretary of Defense come here, Secretary of War come in. He's been very open, and not just focus on CENTCOM issues, but other issues. I mean, we've got hostages being held in Africa. We have major concerns around the world. It's a dangerous place. We're very blessed here in this country. But I'm grateful for their leadership. I'm grateful for their clarity. And look, they want to be very protective with the latest intelligence, but they are willing to share it when they come in and we ask the right questions. They're forthcoming, and I'm grateful for it.
All right, Republican Senator Ted Budd of North Carolina joining us live from Capitol Hill here on Bloomberg TV and radio. Senator, we appreciate your time, as always, joining us here on Bloomberg, where, of course, we're keeping our pulse on what's happening here in Washington, but also what's happening on Wall Street, or more specifically on the NASDAQ today, is that a new stock has just been listed and has begun trading and is doing quite well. Cerebras, after a little more than $5.5 billion IPO priced at $185 a share, it is now trading at $360 a share, up 95% in this debut. We want to get more on this now as we turn to Bailey Lipschultz, who covers IPOs and the like for us here at Bloomberg. So, Bailey, obviously we know anything in the AI realm is hot right now. It makes chips that powers artificial intelligence. You could probably assume that this was going to go fairly well, but going this well? How mispriced was this IPO?
See, we were debating that on our desk, and if I put on my banker hat for a moment, the issue with pricing an IPO is you can't really tell what retail is going to do in the immediate aftermarket. Yes, the stock is up 90%. Yes, we've only had 3 IPOs that raised more than $2.5 billion close up more than 90% in their debut session. But when we look back to Figma over the summer, it opened up like 160% and is now well below what IPO buyers paid. So a lot of froth in the market, a lot of excitement, as you mentioned, around anything AI. You throw out NVIDIA competitor and people just get jacked up. It'll be interesting to see where the stock is trading 3 days, 5 days after their first earnings, and more importantly, 6 months from now when insiders are unlocked.
You know, considering all the concern about the sustainability of the AI spend, this is awfully reassuring for investors in the space. But I wonder if we need to look at this somewhat differently. Is this simply underscoring the incredible amount of spending that's going on? Because here you have a company that's going to receive that spending as opposed to ponying it up like the hyperscalers are. Is this going to be another NVIDIA?
Well, I think that's the question, Joe. And when you talk to investors, their perspective is when this IPO'd call it at $40 billion in market value. Well, NVIDIA is right now trading at $5.7 trillion. So even if the stock doubles or triples or quadruples from here, we're still talking about a drop in the bucket relative to the world's biggest company and relative to the amount of spending that is anticipated in the coming years. To answer your question, I guess more pointedly, there was concern 2 years ago when they tried to go public around just exposure to G42. Then they ink contracts with OpenAI. They've been talking about others. There's just a lot of potential spending, and as kind of you alluded to, if you're the companies either selling chips or building out these data centers, at least from an investing perspective, right now that's more attractive than underwriting some of the massive capital expenditures that those hyperscalers are.
Yeah, well.
Well, and when we consider where the hyperscalers are deploying resources and who ultimately is going to be the beneficiary of all of this, the users of this technology, how does an IPO like this for Cerebras, which, as you say, of course, is much smaller in scale than an NVIDIA or, say, some of these other artificial intelligence AI LLM companies that we believe may be pursuing IPOs in the not-so-distant future. If you're an Anthropic, I would imagine you see this and you're like, all right, we figured appetite was going to be good, but it might be better than we could have even anticipated.
No, I think that's true. And one thing that we keep an eye on is the private markets trading. And Bloomberg has reported that Anthropic's talking to private investors about raising money north of $900 billion in market value, which is astonishing from a year ago. The question inherently is, what would that company look like as a public company? And I think we're going to get a big test in not too many weeks when SpaceX is expected to go public and how that is going to trade. Yeah. So those are going to be interesting test points.
You know, I was asking Nora about this a minute ago. Bailey, when SpaceX hits, when Anthropic hits, when OpenAI hits, where's the money going to come from? Are we going to see investors harvesting gains in stocks like this, in NVIDIA, so they can buy the new issues?
We've been talking to everyone about that exact question. If you're a professional money manager, you're likely fully deployed, which means by definition, if you want to buy a new stock, you have to sell something. So we're looking at the Mag 7 names. We're looking obviously at Tesla, given the overlap with Elon Musk. We're also keeping an eye on Bitcoin, because if you're a retail investor, if you're willing to bet on SpaceX at any kind of cost, you likely are deployed to crypto. So certainly going to be dynamics that we track over the coming weeks.
Wow. Let's see if the market can handle it. Is there enough money to go around, Kailey? I don't know. Bailey Lipschultz with us in the clutch here on another IPO day and the biggest one of the year so far. Bloomberg News senior equities reporter. Cerebras is cranking here, Kailey. We're up 84% now, below the highs of the session. But for what? It was a $185 IPO. We're at 337. We're doing okay, I think, so far. Charlie Pellet's got a view on the broader market here right now, because we'll see if the rising tide is in fact in place here. He's at World Headquarters in New York. Hey, Charlie.
Well, hello there, Joe and Kailey. Lots of moving parts. And yes, we are looking at a record right now on the S&P 500 index. We were trading above 7,500. Very close right now, on track for a record close. Right to the numbers with the S&P at 74.87. That is a gain of 0.6%. Dow Industrials below 50,000 now. 49,982 on the Dow, up 290, higher by about 0.6%. NASDAQ at a record up 174, higher by about 0.7%. The NASDAQ 100 index also rallying up 0.6% and trading at a record. All of this about AI optimism. The 10-year currently yielding 4.45%, with a 2-year 3.98%, and the 30-year 5.00%. Spot gold down 0.1%, 46.82 the ounce, while West Texas Intermediate crude up 0.5%, 101.47 a barrel. Barrel of Brent 105.55 now, lower by 0.1%. As we have been reporting, Cerebras Systems jumping 93% in its trading debut, out of the gate at 185. Cerebras right now trading at 335, up again by roughly 89%. Round one of the PGA Championship underway in Pennsylvania. At last check, South Africa's Aldrich Potgieter sits atop the leaderboard at 3 under par. Again, recapping, S&P at a record, up by 0.6%. Joe and Kailey, that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you so much. We'll, of course, continue to check back in with Charlie on the wider markets and on Cerebras trading after this incredible debut on the NASDAQ. Apparently being a competitor to NVIDIA gets you quite the warm reception among investors when you come to public markets. But, of course, as was pointed out to us by Bailey Lipschultz and our own Nora Melinda, Cerebras has a long way to go if it wants to be the size of NVIDIA, the scale of NVIDIA. The question, of course, for NVIDIA, though, is how much it is able to scale and in what markets, as it would like, obviously, to be able to sell some of its chips in China. So how convenient that the CEO of NVIDIA, Jensen Huang, was picked up in Anchorage and traveled on Air Force One to Beijing, accompanying the president on his trip for the summit with Xi Jinping. There's been a lot of question as to what exactly may be inked or at least talked about when it comes to NVIDIA's H200 chips in particular. And Bloomberg had the chance to speak briefly with Jensen Huang on the sidelines of this trip. This is what he said.
One of the most important summits in human history. And the two presidents, President Xi and President Trump, have such a wonderful relationship. This is an incredible opportunity for us to rely on the relationships to build a much better partnership.
Did you get any specific customers for your chips for the H200?
We didn't really talk about. I'm here to support the president and to represent the United States.
Really interesting there. Did you get any specific customers for your chips? We didn't really talk, he said, but I'm here to support the president and to represent the United States. What's this all leading to? We heard about the deal today with Boeing, 200 jets instead of the expected 500. And that's not all. There's also an agreement to resume U.S. beef imports, which we'll talk about later this hour with Senator Steve Daines. He was in China just last week to help pave the road for that agreement. This summit is not over, though, and we're joined right now by someone who's had a real focus on China for the past couple of years as a lawmaker here in Washington, Congressman Krishnamoorthi, Democrat from Illinois, who was the top Democrat on the China Select Committee at one time and still is steeped in this conversation. Congressman, it's great to see you. Welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. I don't know if there will be a deal announced by NVIDIA, but the stock is at a new all-time high today. And I wonder if you are still concerned about the president mortgaging our national security for the sake of cutting a deal with China.
I am. I think that the president is going into this summit from a position of weakness. I think that the Iran war has sapped us militarily, and it has sapped us economically, and consumers obviously know that because they're paying for it at the pump. And I think, unfortunately, it feels like the Trump administration is almost a supplicant here, asking Xi Jinping to lean on the Iranians to end this godforsaken war. And because of that, I'm concerned that Xi Jinping is going to ask for something in return. What that is, I'm not sure, but it could be anything from easing export controls to us backing off of our support for Taiwan and the status quo and negotiating all differences at the bargaining table, to any number of other issues. And so I'm very concerned about what's going to be discussed today and possibly tomorrow as well.
Well, on Taiwan, Congressman, what was your assessment of the frankly pretty blunt words from Xi Jinping about Taiwan, warning that it's something that could lead to clashes with the United States?
Well, I think that he is basically trying to get us to back off our commitment and obligations under the Taiwan Relations Act, our 6 assurances, our different communications that we've made repeatedly, both to Taiwan and the world, with regard to the situation there. Look, I think that this situation with regard to Taiwan should be negotiated at the bargaining table, but Xi Jinping has basically told the People's Liberation Army hierarchy that he wants them to be ready to take Taiwan by force by 2027, which means next year. And so we're kind of in this zone of danger where if Xi Jinping, if he were to make that decision, I believe would be a terrible mistake, would be catastrophic, and now we should be communicating to him the same, and I fear that we're not. And through our body language and through our request for favors with regard to the Iran war, we're basically giving an opening for Xi Jinping to possibly get something in return that could lead to conflict and possibly war down the road.
Well, then, if China is in fact offering to help the United States or agreeing to help the United States reopen the Strait of Hormuz, should we take that assistance?
I don't know. I don't know exactly what they want and what they're getting in return. I think, to me, because we are basically not working with our friends, partners, and allies on the Iran situation, because this is an unjust and illegal war, we don't have even the consent of the American people who are terribly opposed to this situation. I think that, again, Trump is in a corner, and I feel that he's isolated, and I'm concerned that he's going to make precipitous decisions that really endanger our national security, because he knows, and everybody knows, that we should not be in this war in Iran.
Well, on the subject of national security, returning to the question around NVIDIA and its ability to sell advanced chips to Chinese buyers, Congressman, how wary are you of that notion, knowing it would advance a tech giant that is, frankly, playing a very large role in sustaining at least U.S. financial markets, if not contributing to the economy overall? Where should the limits be for NVIDIA or for anyone else, knowing that China obviously can do things with that technology?
Look, NVIDIA is doing just fine, thank you. I think that the problem that we have right now is that if you ease those export controls, you do two things. One, you basically funnel our highest end technology to help modernize a military, which is basically arrayed against us and trying to erode our national security. And then secondly, you're also helping to fuel a techno-surveillance state, which is putting down the Uyghurs through their Uyghur genocide, that's harming their dissidents, that's harming their Hong Kongers. And it's essentially going against our values to provide them with the highest end technology, not to mention helping our competition to displace us. And so I think we should keep those very important export controls in place that Joe Biden put in place, the previous Trump administration had put in place. They cannot be eased. I'm also concerned about them being skirted right now as is, as we've now heard reports that NVIDIA might be enjoying sales through third-party nations that are funneling some of these chips to China. So we should not only not ease those controls, but we should enforce them even better than they are right now.
Well, interesting. I've only got a minute left, Congressman. I'm just curious your thoughts on the invitation to President Xi as well. Apparently he will be coming to the U.S. and visiting the White House in September. Is that a good thing?
I think it's always good to have these high-level visits and high-level talks. However, one, you have to be prepared, and two, you want to bargain from a position of strength. And if you don't have both of those particular conditions in place, then we enter as supplicants, and we're begging for favors. And when you ask for favors, guess what? The other side gets to ask for things in return, and I'm concerned that in a moment of peril, the Trump administration and Donald Trump in particular, who likes to freelance, will give away something that could cause us great harm.
All right, we will leave it there. Congressman, appreciate you joining us. It's Democratic Congressman Raja Krishnamoorthi of Illinois here with us on Balance of Power. As we further this conversation now with our political panel, Bloomberg Politics contributors Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano are with us, or rather Adam Hodge, I apologize, also a Bloomberg Politics contributor. Forgive me, Adam, our Democratic strategist. Rick, of course, a Republican strategist and partner at Stonecourt Capital. I would love, Rick, just your reaction to what we heard from Krishnamoorthi there, who clearly thinks that the U.S. is the one with the weaker positioning around this summit and has grave concern about acquiescence to Beijing. Do you share them?
Well, certainly this is a good example of the defeat of the notion that all politics ends at the water's edge. I mean, that's the most full-throated sale on the president's trip to China that I've heard all week. So I guess kudos to the Democrats for getting their talking points out. Look, this is not the greatest time for a summit. Obviously, it wasn't the original schedule, and doing it when you have a shooting war going on in the Middle East is never a good idea. That being said, not speaking to our only global rival for long periods of time is equally bad. And so I think you got to give the president some credit for, even though it's not good timing, people were speculating on this trip getting canceled just a week ago. That he's there and he's putting as good a face on it as he can. I thought it was a smart move by bringing over a lot of our premier U.S. corporate executives to mix it up a little bit, try to get some good old-fashioned trade deals done. None of that really matters in the big global scheme of our relationship with China and our protection of Taiwan in an uncertain time. But at the end of the day, so far from what I can tell, no harm done. And the president will return with some novel items in his shopping bag that wouldn't be there if he hadn't made the trip. And everything else seems to be pretty much status quo ante. So knock on wood that the trip continues to go well tomorrow, and and that we pass this moment without a net loss and some incremental gain.
Adam Hodge, what do you make of that? Should politics end at the water's edge?
It should, but I mean, come on. Look at where we are in 2026. And I have the receipts from my time in the Biden administration when we were traveling abroad to know that that was not how the Trump administration and their officials operated. But that aside, look, I think what you heard from Congressman Krishnamoorthi was really important, but that idea of giving away some of the crown jewels of our American innovation is a real risk. It's something that was important as part of the Biden administration's small yard, high fence strategy that we tried to implement. And it had the buy-in of our allies in the region. And I think the thing that China was most concerned about was that we finally got our act together. We had strengthened ties between Korea and Japan, between Japan and the Philippines. We deepened our ties with India, all while making billion-dollar investments here at home that strengthened us, that made us more competitive. The Trump administration has walked away from all of that. And I think that is why you see some concern about, in this weakened state that he finds himself, is he then going to give away the store to try to get some backward deal? That is a real concern I think should be on the minds of all Americans.
Bloomberg Politics contributors Adam Hodge and Rick Davis, thank you both for taking a swing at this. Senator Steve Daines is coming in next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg.
It's 1:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Stocks higher, S&P at a record, and Cerebras system shares are jumping in their first day of trading, up right now by 81% after the AI chip maker and data center firm raised $5.55 billion in the year's largest IPO, out the gate at $185. Right now, Cerebras is trading at $332. S&P 500 index right at 7,500 now, up 56. That is a gain of just about 0.6%. The artificial intelligence trade fueling a record-breaking run. Again, the S&P at 7,500. We've got the Dow above 50,000, 50,060 on the Dow, up now by 0.7%. NASDAQ also at a record, up by 0.9%. The NASDAQ 100 index also at a record, up now by 0.8%. All of this with the VIX just above 17, the 10-year at 4.45%, the 2-year 3.98%, and the 30-year at 5.00%. Spot gold, little change, down 0.2%, 46.79 the ounce, while West Texas Intermediate crude up now by 0.7%, 101.70 on WTI. Barrel of Brent 105.75, up now by just about 0.1%. Cisco, after earnings, up 12.8%. Coming up after the close of trading, we will be hearing from Applied Materials. Round one of the PGA Championship underway in Pennsylvania. At last check, South Africa's Aldrich Potgieter sits atop the leaderboard at 3 under par. Recapping, S&P at a record. Right now it's 74.99, up 0.7%. And shares of the hottest IPO, biggest so far this year, Cerebras Systems, up now by 81%. I'm Charlie Pellet. Joe and Kailey, that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you so much. The biggest IPO of the year, yes, and a very hot stock in its trading debut today. We'll continue to track that for you here on Bloomberg TV and radio. We'll have more on the implications of Cerebras' strong demand that it is seeing and what it means for the overall artificial intelligence trade with Bloomberg's Michael Shepard in just a moment, especially how China factors into that entire conversation. Knowing it is China, the President Trump has not only been focused on, but has been visiting over the last several days. Of course, properly feted by Xi Jinping in Beijing today, going into hours of talks, and of course, setting the groundwork for more talks in the future, including for the first time since 2015, inviting President Xi to a state visit at the White House in September.
Thank you again, President Xi, for this beautiful welcome. And tonight it is my honor to extend an invitation to you and Madam Peng to visit us at the White House this September 24th. And we look forward to it. And I'd now like to raise a glass and propose a toast to the rich and enduring ties between the American and Chinese people.
Those rich and enduring ties do come with some deliverables today, as you've been Hearing on Bloomberg TV and radio, there is a deal for Boeing jets. This is something we were specifically looking for with the CEOs of Boeing and GE Aerospace on this journey. Not as much as the market hoped for. 200 jets. We're not sure what they are. There was an expectation they would be 737 MAXs, the president referring to them as the big ones, the biggies, and we'll have more on that for you. Boeing shares are lower on that announcement, and there is as well an announcement on a resumption of beef imports, U.S. beef imports to China. We're still waiting for news on agriculture, specifically soybeans. None of these deals might have been able to take place, though, without the help of Senator Steve Daines, the Republican from Montana who spent part of his career in China, was back there with an important delegation earlier this month, a longtime advocate for the beef industry, led a bipartisan delegation to China with discussions covering all of these deals that I just mentioned. And I'm glad to say that he joins us now live from Capitol Hill. Senator, we've been looking forward to this conversation, and we can start picking through these one at a time. Why don't we start with the beef imports, because I know that's important to you. This shipment for the shipment licenses, I should say, for hundreds of American slaughterhouses appears to have been scaled back since the original announcement. Can you give us details on what has actually been agreed on?
Well, first of all, it's important to remember it's the second largest beef export market in the world, and U.S. beef was prohibited from that market until 2018. I was over there that year negotiating with China to getting access for the first time, which we did, but then these licenses expired last March and the Chinese did not renew them. So everything I'm hearing is it's positive, it's moving forward. I think the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing sometimes to get the final pieces done on the licenses. But when we were there last week, it was about Boeing, it was about beef, it was about beans, and sure enough, as we're starting to see, we're unpacking these deals. This is real good news. It was about $2 billion of exports of U.S. beef to China before it ceased. So this will be good news here, certainly for farm and ranch country.
Well, and on Boeing, as Joe just mentioned, Senator, the president told Fox that China will be buying 200 big planes. Was it your expectation that that order would be larger than that? Because it certainly seems the market's was.
Well, I haven't seen the mix between the MAXs and the wide bodies yet, specifically, but I know China had not purchased a Boeing aircraft in 9 years. And of course, it's one of the largest commercial aviation markets in the world and one of the fastest growing. Very important we're in that market because the Chinese have their own homegrown brand of Comac, which are now commercially viable. They're flying several of those aircraft with airlines like China Southern, China Eastern. But just stepping back overall, this is good news, and I'll tell you why. Let's not forget that China and the United States are 40% of the world's economy in terms of GDP, the two largest militaries in the world. It's very important that we are de-escalating, that we're not decoupling, that we're de-risking, and bringing our two leaders together. And trade can be a wonderful way to keep the diplomatic ties open, as well as to thaw what was a pretty frosty relationship last year.
Yeah. Well, as someone who understands the nuances of our relationship and the psychology inside the government in Beijing, more than most in Washington, I'm curious what you thought of the rhetoric surrounding Taiwan today, because it raised a lot of eyebrows. Many thought Taiwan wouldn't really be a major factor in these discussions. I know the president indicated he would discuss weapons sales to Taiwan. But the foreign ministry readout says President Xi told Donald Trump behind closed doors the Taiwan question is the most important issue in China-U.S. relations. If handled properly, our relationship will enjoy overall stability. Otherwise, the two countries, he said, will have clashes and even conflicts, putting the entire relationship in great jeopardy. What is President Xi getting at here? And will the president alter the sort of ambiguity that our stand has been known for?
Well, first of all, that's not a surprise. I worked in China with Procter & Gamble. We were some of those first early expats that were based in Guangzhou back in 1992. We had two little kids and we moved over there. We had two more babies born in Hong Kong during our 6-year assignment there launching American brands. But I've been watching the Taiwan issue for a long time, and China and the United States have remained consistent in their respective positions. You go back to the Taiwan Relations Act of 1979, what President Trump was talking about today with their foreign minister Wang Yi and as well as Xi Jinping. is this consistent with where we have been as a country, and China is holding their consistent position as well. So I'm not surprised by it. This issue came up when I met with their Foreign Minister Wang Yi last week in the Great Hall of the People. Similarly, when I met with the Premier Li Qiang, we did talk Taiwan. It's always discussed, so I'm not catching that by surprise. I'm a little surprised the media is saying it's a surprise, because frankly, it's not a surprise. It's always an issue. It's always top of mind for the Chinese, and something we always have to be prepared to stay consistent with the position we've held since 1979.
Well, obviously, Taiwan was in the Chinese readout of this, Senator. It was not in the United States, the White House's readout in terms of what was discussed at these meetings, though the U.S. explicitly did mention the Strait of Hormuz. And President Trump went on in an interview on Fox to say that President Xi said he wants to help in any way he can and wants to see the strait open back up. Should we accept that help from China if offered? Do you expect it would come at a cost?
Well, I think we should accept that help. When I was in Beijing last week, meeting with Foreign Minister Wang Yi, the day before I met with Wang Yi, the Iranian foreign minister was sitting in the same chair I was sitting in a day later, talking about the issues in Iran and the conflict. And the readout from that meeting was that the Chinese want to help stabilize the situation, to de-escalate it and get the Strait of Hormuz open, get the flow of oil moving forward, getting the price of oil down, getting the price of gasoline down. That'll serve not only the United States and China, but the global economy. So they were being helpful, and I'm glad to see that President Trump and Xi Jinping continue that discussion. And everything I'm hearing, it was constructive, and we need China to help us. They do have a unique role to play as an interlocutor with the Iranian government, and we need them to be leading and helping us stop the conflict in Iran and helping us bring this to an end.
What will we hear about agriculture in our remaining moment, Senator? Will there be a deal on soybeans?
I think so. There's deals out there lingering. It's the largest soybean purchaser in the world, and our farmers, certainly in the United States, need access to that market. I'm hoping that we'd also see something in areas like wheat, barley, and chickpeas. These are all important to farm country, and farm country is struggling right now with lower prices and higher input costs.
All right, Senator, we appreciate you joining us so fresh off of your own trip to China. Senator Steve Daines, the Republican from Montana, live with us from Capitol Hill. And as we continue to explore the themes around this visit, not just President Trump's visit to China, of course, but a lot of corporate executives' visit to China, too, including the CEO of NVIDIA, Jensen Huang, who, of course, probably infamously now, joined en route, hopping on Air Force One in Anchorage. A late ad, an invitation from the president, but a significant one at that. And this is something we've continually discussed over the last few days with Bloomberg's Michael Shepard, who covers strategic technology for us here at Bloomberg. Shep, just quickly, and we want to talk to you about the Cerebras IPO as well, because it, of course, wants to compete with NVIDIA in terms of supplying chips that power artificial intelligence. But on NVIDIA, do you expect Jensen Huang is going to be walking away from China with something he wants in hand, which is more ability to sell advanced chips into the Chinese market?
Well, that is certainly his hope. And the Chinese government has been one of the final hurdles standing in the way of that. The U.S. has granted permission through licenses to sell some of those H200 chips. They're part of the Hopper generation of semiconductors used to run and train artificial intelligence systems. It's the second generation behind the current market-leading Blackwell line that we talk so much about. The U.S. has cleared it. Chinese authorities, though, haven't allowed their companies to do so and to make those purchases. And what Jensen is going to be looking for is maybe a loosening of the restrictions on the import side in China. Unclear whether he actually gets that done, but his presence there and President Donald Trump, of course, may be stepping up. It's unclear whether U.S. officials will actually try to break a sweat to do so, but clearly this big CEO delegation, they've got that kind of a goal in mind.
We caught up with Jensen on the sidelines of the summit earlier today. Remarkable language that he used when he was asked specifically, did you get any customers for your chips for the H200? He said, we didn't really talk. But I'm here to support the president and to represent the United States. Is he just playing coy?
Jensen in public can be kind of cagey on those, but he has said previously in public remarks that they have a lot of customers waiting in the wings in China to be able to buy these chips.
Just waiting for a green light.
Just waiting for a green light, and more on the China side. He has been careful not to cast too many stones in that direction, but we do know from our own reporting that really is the case. And Secretary of Commerce Howard Lutnick even told lawmakers last month here in Washington that China was really the main obstacle standing in the way of those added H200 sales. But we'll have to see if we can catch Jensen again somewhere in the sidelines to see if he has an update on those remarks. And certainly next week when they are delivering their quarterly results, he will be asked about it Wednesday afternoon. Tune in then to see if he has more to add off the trip.
Well, I wonder if it'll be a Wednesday that serves as the catalyst for this becoming a $6 trillion company in terms of market valuation. They're getting awfully close. Cerebras is not close to that figure yet, but with this IPO today, they do have a value above $70 billion. Pretty incredible demand we're seeing. The IPO priced at $185 a share. That was above the range already. Opened at $350. We're now trading around $311. So a little bit of steam has come off this right now, Mike. But what does this tell us about the appetite around AI and chips in particular?
Well, Kailey, it really is another sign of the time. So when it comes to AI and this relentless demand for infrastructure needed to help power this technology, there have been all sorts of questions about will the boom start to run out of steam? But based on what we heard from the 4 biggest AI developers that are publicly traded here just last month with their results, and we're talking about Meta, Amazon, Google, and Microsoft, they are continuing to spend, and that means for companies like Cerebras and NVIDIA, lots more purchases of their products.
Shep, thank you as always. Bloomberg's Michael Shepard, as we keep our eyes on the stock. It topped out around 385, was halted for a bit, now at 305, up 65%. We'll have a lot more on this new issue when we reconvene at 5 p.m., the late edition of Balance of Power, only here on Bloomberg. In the meantime, subscribe to the Balance of Power podcast. You'll have a lot to catch up on today, from Senator Steve Daines to Ted Budd. Go to Apple, Spotify, and wherever you get your podcasts, and listen at Bloomberg.com.